So many of the people that I've met and worked with over time feel like there's no time because they themselves have a difficult time managing stress, or what you'd put in the category of distress tolerance. It feels like they're always on to the next thing. They're just speeding on to the next thing. There's not time for that. There's always something else, and it's moving so quickly that I think one of the most impactful ways to create time for the deep and good work is to do it yourself. Like, practice what you preach.
I ran across a street preacher and he was under the bridge in Cincinnati feeding the homeless. And right away, I sent him a DM and said, man, I want to come out and I want to see what this is all about. And I got in a van and he drove me to these homeless camps throughout the city. And when he pulled up, he had hot chocolate and chili, and these people knew him by name. And I said, if I could get the pro athletes to come out here and do this, that would be such an impact, not only on the homeless people, but more importantly, on the athlete.
We're so very fortunate to have three phenomenal partners of the podcast. Play, Rock Daisy, and Output are all companies that I've worked with for many years and fully endorse. Make sure that you support them when you can, or let them know when you see them how much you appreciate them being part of this podcast. Hey guys, welcome back to this CEO Strength Coach podcast. I'm your host, Ron McKeefery. And when I first started off with planning out this podcast and the structure of having these roundtables every fourth week, this episode right here was the first one that I thought about, and it's wanted to have an episode where we talked about having an impact beyond just the four walls of the weight room. And the two fellows on the screen with me here are two of the best at that. Jim Davis is the founder of the Good Athlete Project. He's also at New Trier High School up in Chicago area. We've had a podcast before. I think I've been on some content that he's created in the past, but just an awesome dude doing awesome things. I can't wait for you guys to learn more about that. And Clif Marshall is currently with D1, most recently with Indiana basketball. Ran a performance facility Ignition, but we worked together at the Cincinnati Bengals, and it's just one of those dudes, like you always hear, like a brother from another mother. Like he's that guy for me. And just a great guy, great human, doing awesome things, and his athletes absolutely love him because of a lot of things that he does. So, fellas, I appreciate having you on the show.
Glad to be.
Man, thanks for having me, Ron. Thank you.
Yeah. So, Jim, let's start with you, man. So, the Good Athlete Project. I'm so excited for everybody to hear about this because I think it's something that we would all identify with and champion if we knew about it. But where did that idea come from, and like at what point did you feel like that needed to be its own full kind of move?
No, I appreciate that question, and luckily I can zero it down to almost a particular moment. I like to say that it's been building my entire life. I played football for a long time. I played in college. I had a short stint afterwards. I was a professional, but with very loose terms. I didn't make the Bengals or any team in the NFL. But I played for a long time, chased a dream, coached for a long time, and it was actually when I went pursue a graduate degree. I studied human development and psychology at Harvard. My sub-focus was cognitive neuroscience, and there was a day in the fall in Cambridge, out of a dream type setting, almost like, what am I even doing here moment, where I'm sitting in the back of a neuroscience classroom, and we're talking about the attention and retention networks of the brain. So what makes the brain perk up and pay attention, and then what makes the information stick. And we eventually, as a class, started to identify this bullet-pointed list of components that would have to be available in the environment to bring this to life. And we had this list of novelty, peer influence, social factors, powerful mentorship, attachment to a purpose, something called exercise-induced neural enhancement, where I'm sure you guys have heard this, where you shift the chemical cocktails in the brain to accomplish this state. And what I'm seeing in the back of the room, like true light bulb moment, is, well, we have that environment already. It's sports. It is 200 million people strong in the US alone. That might be the most powerful educational platform on the planet. If we had to go back and create something to take advantage of these ideas, we wouldn't have to. It's here. So that was light bulb one. And then not so much a light bulb, but an important recognition was that power doesn't always lead to positive outcome. And sports gone wrong is a daily headline. You don't need to look very far to see the truth in that. So here's this incredibly powerful place and the question ultimately was, are we maximizing it? Are we optimizing this space for all that it could be? And then the road just began. That was in 2015. By 2016, we had filed as a nonprofit, and we had developed a board of directors, and we were starting to move all over the world trying to help coaches and then eventually schools and administrations and then governing bodies do this work as well as it could be done. That's the hope, at least. And it really is, I say, taken off lightly and with humility, because we're trying to grow just organically. We don't want to force this on anyone. And I'm sure you guys would be quick to notice that to do this work well, it has to be individualized to a degree. So when we went down to a basketball camp in Haiti a couple times, the advice or the adjustments or the things that we were trying to influence down there were significantly different than what's happening on the north side of Chicago, which is significantly different than what's happening on the south side of Chicago, or in Boston, or in California, or in Texas. So we're able to sort of sit in with people. We think of ourselves as a nonprofit education consulting foundation. So we sit in with people and help them do that work well.
Yeah, expand a little bit on what's the actual day to day, or what are kind of the chief offerings of the organization.
We do well. We started with team workshops, and that was kind of the easy yes. People, people are recruiting that sort of interaction all the time. So we sat in with teams oftentimes, and that was good and fun and meaningful. And slowly we started to recognize, and this is more and more where the work has gone, is if we want this to last, it probably not just a drop in one day, hype people up for a moment and then say best of luck. So we recognized that if we were going to do a team workshop, we should probably sit in with the coaching staff beforehand and then have them help facilitate the team workshop and then carry these ideas forward. And more that has been what we're about, sitting in with coaching staffs. And you can imagine the ripple effect out from there. If a staff is on board, maybe we sit with the athletic department and we talk to all the head coaches. So we do a lot of one day in person, followed up by a significant amount of support afterwards, if that makes sense. But and day to day, that's an interesting question, and I wish it was. I'm sure you could both identify with this, but there is no 9 to 5 in this sort of work. You got to be adaptable, changes by the day. We're very fortunate. We've flown out to Colorado Springs, worked with some of the fledgling Olympians. That's its own engagement. We've worked with college programs, and that's a lot of it. And the truth is, in addition to that, we try to contribute to the research. And that was one of the big ideas. I maybe should have mentioned that. But one of the things I saw when I was in grad school was there are fantastic people doing fantastic things in universities that are influenced by, but don't always speak to the folks on the front lines. And myself and everyone on our staff, we're on the front lines as well. So we try to touch both spaces and bridge the gap between them. Take deep research-based university content and make it accessible to a coach on the front lines, and vice versa. And hey, folks in the university, here's what they're hearing and seeing and what they might need. Can we help with that? And actually, just to be really cheesy, that's, bridging the gap. The acronym Good Athlete Project is the gap. We try to bridge the gap. So we're touching on all those fronts.
Yeah, what an incredible story, and so many things off of that. I mean, the trip to Haiti, I know you put on some local powerlifting meets in the past, and have quite a few things there, but just really, really cool. I want to dig into that more, but I want to talk a little bit about Clif's story here now. Clif is by far the guy that, I mean, like, I always feel a little bit convicted, especially as a Christian, around Clif, because he just does so much when it comes to incorporating his faith into his work. And really being open, with his athletes and providing them the opportunity to kind of grow, not just as people, but also as Christians if they wanted to as well. Clif, one of the most impactful moments that I've had in coaching, I don't know if I'm not sure we've talked about this, but one of the most impactful moments that I've had in coaching is when you invited me out with you and some people, and then some of our athletes at the Bengals to go feed the homeless, and it wasn't like this organized, like, church type, we're going to go to this place and serve food. It was like, all right, let's go get in a van and let's go find them, and we literally, I remember going and buying some gloves and some scarves and, there's some food and all that. We went into like some, areas that I probably wouldn't have gone in on by myself. And here we are, it's you, me, and some of our players. And it was just an important like connection for me because I'd always had a relationship with players outside of the weight room, but like to provide that kind of life experience with them was something that I took away from that. And then I've done that since everywhere I've been. Talk a little bit about how you've gone from Bible studies at home with you and your wife to taking guys fishing on the farm to, feeding the homeless, how you've gone about really making that type of impact with your athletes outside of the weight room.
Well, yeah, Ron, thank you for that. And man, that was such a great memory. And you can think about all the wins, even the losses, the conversations we had in Cincinnati at the Bengals weight room. But that's the one thing that stands out to you. And I think the reason it stands out is because it's eternal. I mean, it's not what we can get, it's what we can give. And I think, with the platform there with the Cincinnati Bengals players and going out and feeding the homeless, just an incredible, incredible ministry there. But I think, Ron, to answer your question, you can't give as a coach what you don't have. And I didn't have faith for many years. I came to Christ in 2008. I was broken. I was desperate. I was dealing with adultery, addiction to alcohol, just in a very, very dark place. And I fell to my knees and asked God to save me, to heal me, to forgive me, and to redeem my marriage. And by the grace of God, I'm 17 years sober now. My marriage has been saved. We have two beautiful kids. And now I've taken that into my coaching career. 1 Timothy 4:8 says, "For physical training is of some value, but godliness has value for all things, holding promise for the present life and the life to come." In other words, I believe in training the mind, the body, but most importantly, the spirit, because that lives on forever. And it changed my whole coaching philosophy, so to speak. It changed when I was training a player for the NFL draft many years ago. And he faced a near death experience. We were down in Naples, Florida. We were training again for the NFL Combine. This player and some of the other players I was training decided to go off and get on jet skis. And this particular player went way, way far out. I got a phone call at about 6 p.m. saying he was missing. They found his jet ski floating in the Gulf, and there had been a 2-hour search, and he had not been found. They had flown helicopters over the Gulf. Long story short, with about 10 minutes left in the search before it got too dark, they found him floating in the Gulf. They rushed him to the hospital. He lived. But I share that to tell you, in that moment for me, I realized it's not about the result. It's not about the 40-yard dash, the vertical jump, and the bench press. It's about the relationship and the impact you have on your athletes. So that's when I started trying to incorporate faith-based training and Bible studies and outreach and things like that into my day-to-day approach.
Yeah, and I think one thing that you do, and I think we all do, I've had this conversation a lot of times. Like there's a verse in the Bible that talks about you don't throw a light into the light, throw a light into the darkness, right? And I always looked at coaching as my witness. But I'm not a guy that goes to church every Sunday. I'm not a guy that does every Bible study, right? Like it's just not part of my my work week, I guess I should say. But like you're not like the way that you do it. You're not the God Squad. Like people don't feel like they can't be themselves around you, or sport and all those types of things. But the way that you live your life, everything, you and I both believe like everything's biblical, right? And there's leadership is biblical, and you can find the leadership lessons. And a lot of times by doing that and helping people live a little bit better life, it leads to maybe a relationship with Christ. But even if it doesn't, at least that biblical foundation has been passed on. But talk a little bit about how you're able to integrate that in kind of a secular environment without being the person that like, oh, that's Cliff. Don't cuss around Cliff, right? Or don't be yourself around Cliff.
Yeah, no, great point. My devotional this morning said, preach the gospel, when necessary, use words. In other words, you don't have to be quoting Bible verses and doing this, that, and the other, especially when you're in a public university working or at a public high school. You just have to be a person that loves on your athletes, right? And I think that what I have learned is coaching just isn't about performance. It's about discipleship. And so part of me is, the last 8 years I've been at Indiana University, right? You can't be writing a Bible verse up on the wall, or you can't be quoting scriptures during workout. You can't be openly praying with players after lifting sessions, right? That's not allowed. So what I learned is something that Tom Allen shared with me. He was a football coach here for Indiana University. And I asked him how he goes about discipling players because he develops great relationships with his football players. And he said, Cliff, the first meeting I have with them, I ask them, what are the three most important things in your life? And many of them will write football, education, my family. But if they list faith and their relationship with Christ as one of them, that opens up the opportunity to share with them, come alongside of them, and to help them on their faith journey, on their Christian walk. And so what I would do is invite those players in at Indiana University. We would have an optional weekly Bible study in the off season. And once the season started, we led a team chapel that was optional as well right before the games. And I can tell you, like, the vulnerability, players growing close in those Bible studies, in those chapels. Ron, you know, now with NIL, you're building a new team every single year. And so the most important thing as you're building those teams is that guys can relate to each other, that they can build a cohesive connectiveness. And I think the Bible studies and the chapels helped us with that because guys were able to share their story, share their struggles, things that they were dealing with. And so for me, that was a huge thing. The other thing I would say is players, they want quality time with their coach. They need one-on-one time with their coach. And another thing that I did at Indiana University, and I got this through Luke Day, who's a strength coach at South Carolina football, but I also went through it myself during marriage counseling. My wife and I did something called the 5 love languages. And the 5 love languages describe the way that you receive love as a person, right? So it can be acts of service, words of affirmation. It could be quality time. 70% of our players at Indiana University on the men's basketball team over the course of 8 years tested as their love language being quality time. In other words, you have to get outside the weight room, the 4 walls of the weight room, and you have to go and you have to spend time with your players. And so that's why I would take them fishing. That's why I love the Bible studies. You know, lunch, I would take guys to church if they wanted to go on Sunday. They became part of my family. And it's because if you want to reach the heart of the athlete, you have to find time to spend with them outside of their normal training hours.
I had a team chaplain of ours that would always say, you spell love Time, right?
Mm.
And that is that is a really precious commodity when you're a coach, right? It's time. You don't have much of it. And you've worked 12 hours, you've worked sometimes 16 hours, right? And then to find that time outside of the weight room, for me, it was never like, it's not that I don't want to take my staff to lunch or I don't want to go, hang out or take X person to X Bible study or what. It was just like, man, like I'm choosing family or I'm choosing this or like there's always this kind of give or take. Jim, how do coaches in general will often say, like, I want to do more. Like, I want to be that person. I want to start out not for profit. I want to do a Bible study, but I just don't have the time. Like, what's your response to that?
I think I have, that's interesting. And I love that. I'm going to use that quote. You spell love Time. There's always time. I think it just depends what you prioritize. And there are, you could Google it really quickly and find 1,000 strategies for, time blocking, efficient, making your day more efficient, et cetera, et cetera. But the truth is, I'm a pretty big believer, and we've created some frameworks around this. One was called the CARE model. But I think a lot of it comes from self-work, and I really mean that. And again, I'm risking being cheesy and pushing people away with this potentially what might on the surface seem like a soft concept. But I think so many of the people that I've met and worked with over time feel like there's no time because they themselves have a difficult time managing stress, or what you'd put in the category of distress tolerance. If they cannot just, it feels like they're always on to the next thing. They're just speeding on to the next thing. There's not time for that. I'm sure in the strength world, you hear that from almost every coach. We can't sacrifice 10 minutes of practice for this soft tissue that we gotta install. There's always something else, and it's moving so quickly that I think one of the most impactful ways to create time for the deep and good work is to do it yourself. You practice what you preach. Yeah, I can give a sort of a concrete example. Ron, you mentioned some of the meets we run. One of the first initiatives of the Good Athlete Project was we started this the governing body of powerlifting in Illinois at the high school level, Illinois High School Powerlifting Association. And it was sort of a cool pet project. We knew that it could be something, and now it's grown to, we have 6 regional events that funnel into a state championship event that we got 1A and 2A, hundreds of the strongest kids in the state, thousands of people. It's a special thing, and we're very proud of it. The first component is we just use this gathering to do something more. So at each one of those meets, there'll be some sort of community effort. At the state meet, we usually partner with the Infant Welfare Society in Chicago, and we do a diaper drive for families in need. That's just like the kind of to give people a sense of a little bit of what we're about. But then after the events, and for those who aren't familiar with how a powerlifting meet works, you run the squat event, and then you pause, transition, warm up for the bench press, and then there's like these little pockets in between. And what we do is we shut everything down. We finish the squats, we shut it down, we bring everyone together, and we talk, we carve out, we make time for it. Could it interrupt the flow of the meet? Potentially, but not if we as facilitators are on our game. And we talk about essentially what just happened. Like what happens while doing max effort back squat. And we talk about some of the social emotional learning or performance psychology principles that were engaged just then. And we have athletes name it. And just for sake of the story, I'll say, and you guys can imagine this, when you're in the bottom of a squat, it's by definition like a max. It's the most you can do. It's heavy, it is hard, and everyone in the room at least tried to push back up against it. And most of them succeed, but everyone at least went for it. And when the far easier thing to do would have just let the spotters take over and get out of this challenge. And we asked people to reflect on it and name what just happened. Put a name to it. Is it grit? Is it resilience? Is it toughness, broadly speaking? And then we stay slow. We keep everyone's focus. It's a massive room. And we ask them to project it forward and say, when can you imagine the next time you might need a bit of resilience? And we try to really frame the experience for people. In fact, it leads into our idea. We kind of push back on the idea that sports teach life lessons. Well, surely they can, but not unless folks like us are making sure that these lessons are explicit and actually taught. Like football or powerlifting or whatever it might be, is not necessarily going to allow you to go be a good father or partner or CEO. But some of the lessons in football, when framed appropriately, can absolutely tee you up to utilizing those things down the road. So how do you make time for it? Settle the internal distress, try to get clear on what your priorities are. And then, as dumb or simple as it might sound, is just freaking make time for it. We're going to spend 10 extra minutes doing this thing, which we think is really important. And if we see some people in the back of the crowd getting a little restless, saying, let's move on to bench, we have to be okay with that. We're comfortable with that.
Yeah, that's some great stuff there. A couple takeaways. Like I would always tell our staff that, our players, like the meat and potatoes of the lift, like we have to have the meat and potatoes, right? That's got to be in. That's the boring stuff. But we got to incorporate a little bit of sugar. That's the position specific stuff or the technology or the different pieces that they feel like are going to make it individualized for them. And so one of the places that I would always say to put that is in the active rest, right? While you're waiting for your set for bench or you're waiting for your set for squat, go juggle tennis balls for your receiver, or do whatever, right? And that's exactly what you're doing there is like you're using those gaps of time where maybe there's setup going on or there's something else to that active rest to put these lessons in, just like I would at the beginning of every lift with some more sort of lesson or story, or at the end of every lift. Like I know Clif does it at the beginning of every lift as well, or on the grease board even. But that's super important. And then another thing that you said there, and I think tie it back to Clif. Like I know Clif does this, and I would imagine you do this too. But like his job, and your job, it's a family affair. Like, I'm not missing out on my family because my family's helping me go pass out food up to the homeless, they're there to within the Bible study with the players and being around some really, really cool people. And what that does is it really creates community and connection, right? And Cliff, you're a master at that, man. So like, what are some of the little tidbits, the little things that you do? Maybe it's like a reminder in your phone. Maybe it's a note in your devotional or whatever. What are those little things that you do to kind of remind you to create community and connection throughout your day?
Yeah, Ron, great point. I just want to speak to the coaches. I know you have a lot of coaches listening to this, and I try to bring the family aspect to the training program. In other words, I like for my players to come visit my family at my house. I also like for my kids to go and be with me at work so they can see what I do. And the players appreciate that. I really believe that, as I've been told. And the other thing I would say is that you can be replaced at work, but you can't be replaced at home. So it comes down to kingdom priorities. It's my faith first, it's my family second, and it's my job third. Now, all three are intertwined and work very well together when we keep those in that order. But I have learned the hard way that when I put my job first and I put my identity into my job, then it takes me to a very, very dark place. So for me, my identity is I'm a child of God, I'm a husband, I'm a father, and then I'm a strength coach.
Can I build on that, Cliff? I love that you just
Yeah.
shared that.
Yes, for sure, Jim.
Because that aligns so directly with that sort of internal steadiness that I was talking about. And I almost, you can imagine, I'm sure we've all either felt personally or been around the profile where job is first, identity is directly connected with the job. And I think that's where a lot of that unsteadiness might come from. That like, we got to move, because this somehow is a reflection directly of me, not just what I'm able to do, but like me deep down. And that's, I love that prioritization, because that's exactly the sort of steadiness that I think allows people to navigate the distress and then see the landscape for what it is and recognize that there certainly is time to bring all of this to life.
Cliff, you talked a little bit there about kind of ambition, I think, in this as well. Like as a coach, right? Like we're all like, I always say that you have to be a little skewed to be great in anything, right? Like as a coach, to be at the levels that we've been at, like you have to be a little bit skewed, from the normal person, right? And it's okay that it's healthy. It's even biblical to have like, to chase something, right? Like it's okay to have some pride or some ego, healthy ego in what you do. And I know like some of the things that you guys have done, right? So whether it's putting on a powerlifting meet or the Good Athlete Project or creating Bible studies or things like that. I know for me, there's been times when I've done those types of things or looked to do those types of things. And I'm always like, okay, am I going to have some fan say something about how my attention's being diverted from the team to go do this, this not-for-profit thing on the side? Or is some administrator going to say something about me praying with an athlete or inviting an athlete to my house or something like that? There's always been a little bit of apprehension there on some things, at least a thought that goes through my head, right? And sometimes that goes through a filter of ambition. Like I want to continue to climb. I want to continue to go to the next level or whatever it might be. Talk a little bit about, and you guys are the most humble dudes in the world, but like talk a little bit about how doing things like this has led to networking and more opportunity in your jobs and even a bigger platform for your career than maybe you even thought about.
Well, Ryan, you bring up a good point. I'm paid and have been paid to get athletes bigger, faster, and stronger. So you can't argue that. You can't negotiate that like that's your job. But within the job, I think there's also opportunities to be the light in the darkness, as you said. And for me, it's more about coaching with an eternal perspective. In other words, God's not going to ask me how many 400-pound bench pressers I had, how many 4-3s I had, or how many 40-inch verticals I had. He's simply going to ask me, how did you love your athletes? How did you impact your athletes? And to be honest with you, Ron, I have an office at my house, and just like you, I've got lots of memorabilia. I've got a couple of, right here on my desk, I got a couple of championship rings. When I was at the University of Louisville football, we won the conference championship. When I was with the Dayton Flyers men's basketball team, we have a conference championship. I got the rings right here. But the most important ring in my office are the letters that players have written to me. As a matter of fact, I just got one in the mail recently, and this player's in the NBA, and I just wanted to read it real quick. As this truly is my Super Bowl ring. This letter says, "Dear Cliff, someone recently asked me, what's the kindest thing someone has done for you? I went on a walk to think about it. Our time at Soma Coffee Shop after the Northwestern game, when I was in shambles, helped me so much. A pat on the back wasn't going to help. I needed more. That's where you stepped in. That time was so truly powerful for me, and I thank you for pouring into me when I needed it most. I'm grateful for your leadership and for our relationship. Thank you for being you, Miller Kopp." Miller's now in the NBA, but as I look at that letter, Ron and Jim, I'm reminded, man, it's not about the wins and the losses. It's not about the championship rings. It's truly about the impact that you can leave on your athletes.
100%. Yeah. I think that's one of the, like in that book, in the CEO Strength Coach book, I said that, like I was obsessed with success, and I thought success was the rings, the championships, the logos, the different things. And it, like, yeah, as a Christian, or even if you're not a Christian, like having a eternal impact on your athletes, that's the wins. That's the championship for 100%. And the sooner that you realize that, the smoother your coaching career becomes. If you're solely hinging it on wins and losses, successes or failures, it's a tough road. This business is a tough road. But I do think that, there is an opportunity there, again, for the ambitious to say, okay, like doing these things, not only does it help you with your identity of what you're trying to accomplish, but like it could also have a professional impact on your career, and to be able to have an NBA player that you can pick up the phone and call to maybe counsel, maybe one of your younger NBA players, that you might have that might be going through a similar time. Like that can help you in your coaching career, whether or not that's a faith-based piece or not.
Yeah, Rod, let me add to this. And I just wanted to share this story real quickly because you brought up the point. It can help you professionally, especially when the players appreciate you for being more than just a strength coach. My first 4 years here at Indiana, I worked for a coach who had hired me that was at Dayton. And he was relieved of his duties after year 4. They hire a new coach and they hired him from the NBA. I didn't know him. None of my circle knew him. So I was assuming that my career, my job here at Indiana was finished. But at that time, we had a player on our roster named Trace Jackson Davis. He was a first team All American, a McDonald's All American, a projected first round draft pick. And our head coach that they hired, Mike Woodson, was wanting him to come back and not go to the NBA draft. And I guess without me knowing this, in a meeting with Mike Woodson, Trace Jackson Davis said, if you want me to come back, I want to continue to work with the strength coach that's recruited me and been with me and my family since I was a sophomore in high school. And that's Clif Marshall. And lo and behold, a couple days later, Mike Woodson walks down to the weight room. My stuff is in boxes. I'm ready to pack up and leave Bloomington. And he says, can I have a meeting with you? And he says, you've made an impact on a number of players here at Indiana. Trace Jackson Davis is one of them. And I want to offer you an opportunity to continue to work here and to be my strength coach. If I didn't spend time with Trace Jackson Davis outside of the weight room in Bible studies and with chapel and taking him fishing, taking him out to eat, taking him to church, I would have never been granted that opportunity to get 4 more years at Indiana University. So, Ron, to your point, absolutely, this relationship building can help you in your career.
Yeah, I think that, and I don't want this to be mistaken for what I'm trying to say here, because if you do those, if your sole purpose is to advance your career, then what you do is going to be inauthentic, right? But because it was authentic and you truly wanted to have that kind of relationship with that player outside of the weight room, then that person's willing to step on a table for you and fight for you. And that's the key, right? And that's what I'm trying to get across, is that they're not exclusive to one another. They can be mutually inclusive there. But Jim, I want there to be some takeaways here in our last 5 minutes here. So
Well, can I build on that?
100%. Yeah.
It's so right, and you nailed it. Number one, yes, it can support you professionally. Number two, of course, it has to be authentic. You can push that to the false side of things, and it bites you. But one of the things that we try to do, or I try to do, is you imagine a potentially resistant audience to some of the things that we're talking about. Because like you say, light into dark, it's not just the committee of the willing. It's like, how do we spread this to even more? And we've addressed it, but a lot of what we tried to tap into in terms of performance psychology and getting people to a sustainably high performing place, we sit on the back end and try to be sure that whatever we're sharing is good for life also. And there's avenues of study on this. For example, grit, which, some people would push back on in certain areas, but like, it'd be hard to argue against the idea that on 4th and 1 late in the game, to develop this capacity for grit would be anything but working in your favor. Well, and then you can attach that to the idea that there's also longitudinal studies that suggest that developing grit in someone also has positive impacts on their mental health long-term. Passion and perseverance for long-term goals is sort of the theme of grit. It's not just toughness. It's a sort of a deeper thing than that. So I think if we, from our side of things, can distribute lessons that are good on the field, court, pool, etc., but also good for life, then we've done something kind of special and important. And we all know that, and I hope some coaches might listen to this and be able to reflect, but like the very, you mentioned meat and potatoes and then sugar. Well, if your diet's all sugar, that too is going to backfire. So you
Mm,
can
yeah.
hit the gas, you can get outcomes in a way that certainly does not support an athlete long term. But then whatever ring or trophy you put on your shelf, that's hollow, man. Like I've been there, and I would say one tangible that people can take and use for sure, and then Ron, however else you want to prompt it, but whenever the teams we work with, and I've never worked for the Bengals or Alabama or Indiana, but I have been very fortunate to work with more than 50 state and national championship teams. So, it seems almost self-aggrandizing, but when I go to share this with folks, it's like, no, this is not the enemy of performance. We all want that for sure, but we want to do it in a sustainable way. Whenever we get the outcome that we were after, we do it regardless, but especially when we get a ring or a trophy or something like that, we do like a ring ceremony, and we share out, and we have people on the team step up and say, okay, when you put this thing on in the future, what stories is this going to bring? Tell a story or a lesson that you learned from the season. And that's another one of those time grabs where it's like, that doesn't take all that long, but man, it can make an imprint that makes this moment in the season's career lasting.
Yeah, such an important thing. Like that's fantastic, and I love the it's not the enemy of performance. Like it's not a reductionist line of thinking. It's not either or. It can be and. When doing these things is and I love, like you said, like you got to arm yourself with the knowledge, right? So if it's reading Angela Duckworth and Grit, or it's reading research or these different things, but finding those moments within training sessions outside of the weight room, whether or not it's faith-based or not, these are things that are going to lead to success both on the field, but in their life, and finding those moments to kind of integrate that in. You guys, like I said, I want to end this with kind of just some action steps, right? But, just like I said that when I wrote, my books, like every strength coach has a book in them, right? I think every strength coach has a cause in them, right? Something that they want to champion. If that's creating a non-for-profit like it is for you, Jim, or it's creating some sort of, initiative like going out and feeding the homeless or something like that for you, Cliff. Like, talk about like first steps. Like, how do I get the freaking momentum rolling?
I just say, Ron, from me, just start where you're at. Do what you can. You can sit in your office and plan and write it down and just go. Just start. And, when we go back to Cincinnati, the time you and I had together there, I ran across a street preacher basically on Facebook, and he was under the bridge in Cincinnati feeding the homeless. And right away, I sent him a DM on his Facebook and said, man, I want to come out and I want to see what this is all about. And I got in a van, and he drove me to these homeless camps throughout the city that were in the woods. And when he pulled up, he had hot chocolate and chili, and these people knew him by name. And I said, if I could get the pro athletes, if I could get the Bengals to come out here and do this, that would be such an impact, not only on the homeless people, but more importantly, on the athletes. Because again, it's not what you give, it's what you get. And our athletes got more from that than the homeless people did. And so I just think, the ministry, it's just about getting started right where you're at, not sitting around and coming up with the master plan.
Yeah. I agree. I think movement is key. I think the way we usually do it, and we do this pretty routinely with people, and it is fun and fulfilling and enlivening. But one of the first things that we do in pursuit of movement, to Cliff's point, is we try to distinguish instinct from anxiety. So, and that's one of those things, like I just believe in people, and I think your instincts are worth listening to. But one of the first things we ask people to do is, if you had to remove some of the external pressures and recognize what is making you anxious. Like, I have to do this because someone over there thinks I should, or because if I get this cool car, then I'm going to be valuable as whatever. Start to remove those things, listen to instincts. And then our next step is, and then we get intentional. And you mentioned, I'm looking at a whiteboard over here. This is my home. I love a good whiteboard. We ask people to get clear on what's important to them. That's the biggest thing. And if you can create a list of 3 to 5 things that matter to you. And I love, Cliff, you mentioned Tom Allen's question, the 3 most important things in your life. If you can get people to reflect on that, what we have found is the next steps, the road is not as full of hurdles as you may have thought. The next step might be sitting in your lap or down the hallway or just down the street. That's when it comes to service. I do think, our operative concept, we call it the mantra of practical mindfulness, is, does your behavior match your goal? And it seems pretty straightforward. You can call it up at any point. And what we have found is that folks who are driven, perhaps by anxiety or external pressures, have a hard time not answering the behavior question because they're moving constantly, but the goal question. This for. And if we want to be a community-focused group, if we want to support athletes, health, wellness, etc., for a lifetime, let's be willing to say it out loud, and then we can construct these next things, move toward them, and then we have additional process. Then review: did we get it right, or do we shift a little next time? Yeah, that's
Yeah.
how we move through it.
I think both of those things, I think you got to just like you said, Cliff, I think you got to get started, and, and then the stronger you are with your mission, your focus, like you mentioned, and like the easier it is to rally other people around it. Right.
Yeah.
The one other thing that I would add to that is, I think there's a lot of people that feel like, well, I don't know anything about a non-for-profit. So like, I'm not, I'd love to do that, but like, that's like, I'm a strength coach, like I'm a meathead. I understand that business stuff. Right. Um, maybe they don't feel like they can just reach out to anybody or something, but I think the more rooms you put yourself in, right, the more you learn that like everybody's just trying to figure it out, and the people that created those not-for-profits, they didn't know what they were doing when they first started that as either. You took action, and then there all of a sudden, like, other people kind of helped you along the way, probably. And I think that that's an important part of it, is that by taking action, rally people around you that can help you do some of that more technical stuff. Those things don't present itself when
That's right. And you get, and then I think the really special thing that happens, and then your eyes are open then to see that they're sitting right in your lap. Yeah, couldn't agree more. And isn't it the ultimate unifying thing just across the three of us and probably most of your listenership? If you're in the business of strength and conditioning, you're in the business of human development. So there's a cause right there. So to see need, and then your particular avenue, and then lean into your strengths within that, they're pretty fluidly if your eyes are open.
Well, if it wasn't obvious at the beginning that you two are shining examples of what this is all about in this message, then it is definitely now from this episode. But man, I appreciate what you guys do, how you go about your business, the impact that you make. It's made an impact on me, obviously, and I know it's others as well. But appreciate you coming on the show and sharing with everybody.
Thank you for having us. Great to meet you, Cliff.
Nice to meet you, Jim. Ron, thanks for having us. Iron sharpens iron. I'm better because of the last 45 minutes of this conversation we've had, so I appreciate you guys.
Thank you both.